Do you have a fearful avoidant partner, or are you a fearful avoidant yourself? And you've noticed that at times you really struggle to give the other person what they're asking for or what they need. If so, that's what we're going to cover today in today's video. Hey everyone, I'm Sonia, and on this channel, I strive to give you tips, strategies, and information to help you with healing your attachment style, to navigating relationships, and to living your best life. And if you want any help with life coaching, relationship coaching, attachment style healing, belief reprogramming, all of that, go ahead and look below, get on my newsletter. You'll get a PDF of some other information when you do that to explore. But go ahead and book a 20-minute consultation because, I can see if we're a good fit, but also I might be able to point you to some important resources that could help you. All right, so today, it's part of this series that I'm doing about the different attachment styles and when there's a struggle with meeting someone else's need. Like, so someone else, let's say, often a partner, right, will have asked for something, perhaps in the terms of negotiating something in the relationship, or it's just come up. And, last time we talked about it for dismissive avoidance. But in this case, it's maybe less clear. So in dismissive avoidance, maybe we see as more resistant to that kind of thing, to asking for specific things from a relationship. But it can happen for a fearful avoidant as well. And I'm going to tell you why first, why this can happen and how it might look. And then we'll go into some tips and strategies, both if your partner is the fearful avoidant or if you're the fearful avoidant yourself. Okay, so why might it look this way for a fearful avoidant? We tend to think of fearful avoidants, and they are, right, as like pretty deep, caring, like really wanting to connect with you people. We don't necessarily think of them, like I said, as like not wanting to meet our needs in general. They very much might want to hear about them, want to go in depth about them. But it's true that sometimes a fearful avoidant will actually really push back. And I would say there's kind of two main cases when this is happening. So it's either that they're flipping into their dismissive avoidance side, because really fearful avoidance can be almost more like an AP, an anxious preoccupied. And then sometimes they will flip. They have their own nuances too, of course, but there is this set way in which they're kind of like that. And then they also sometimes in the moment, particularly in the moment of an argument, but even sometimes for longer stretches of time, can flip into more of a dismissive avoidance side, where they're much more withdrawing and they're more resisting the connection pieces of the relationship. So it could be that it's in that. So it could have been like in the heat of the moment in a negotiation situation, something triggered them, because that's why it happens, and they flipped into that dismissive avoidance side, and that's why they're just feeling more resistant to the connection. So that's a little different actually than how that looks for the dismissive avoidant. As I cover, you can see more about that. I'll link it to the last video, because with the dismissive avoidant, it's really around their actual I'm defective or I can't do it in the relationship core wound. So that's not in the case for the fearful avoidant. They're being protective and sort of resisting the connection more in that case. But another huge way this happens, and this is probably more common for when it's around this specific issue of resisting meeting someone else's need. Usually this is because a fearful avoidant has gone into overwhelm. And so that means that they're suddenly feeling like everything's too much for them, whether that's in terms of the amount of things they need to do, whether that's in terms of the amount that they're feeling responsible or caring, connected to other people. And what's interesting about this is it's more of a core wound, limiting belief kind of thing, because it isn't necessarily because anyone could feel this, right? If they're actually overwhelmed with all these things going on in their life. But for a fearful avoidant, it wouldn't have to map exactly to what's going on in their life. It's more their perception of it. So their perception, for some reason, has gone into that they're overwhelmed and it feels like too much, and they feel too responsible, they feel overburdened, and they're just going into overwhelm basically. And so the reason this often happens for fearful avoidance is because of boundaries and not saying their own things that they have been needing, but because they're fearful. So this can happen with an anxious preoccupied too, right? And I'll cover them in the future here. But so it's rather than even just sort of having taken on too much, it's that they have taken on too much for them because they haven't been communicating properly. So the difference with an AP and an FA is that the FA, though, then what happens is that then they usually suddenly set very strong boundaries. So they'll have been, suddenly reach this point where it feels like too much, or they haven't been speaking up for themselves or having any boundaries. And then it'll flip into like suddenly many, many boundaries. And so that's where it's like that, it's that feeling of overwhelm, but the way that presents then is like a resistance to anything more, because it's like now it's like these like overly strong kind of boundaries, or like really big boundaries being set. Like I'm not doing anything more. If I do anything more, it's going to be the tipping point, right? It often has a lot of that overwhelmed feeling in the body, though, like I said. So that is the why. The why it can often come up in relationships, beyond, literally someone, which anyone can have happen, being overburdened. It can be that they just flipped for a different reason, like maybe it was part of an argument and they got hurt and they went into protection mode, they got triggered by something, and they're actually in their more DA side. But even more commonly, it's that they went into overwhelm. And so they're in this sort of hyper boundaried sense of feeling like they just sort of can't do one thing more, or can't connect one time more. So that's the reason why. So what can you do about it if you are, I'm going to go through like what you can do if you're the partner, and then a few tips for you if you're the fearful avoidant as well. So if you're their partner, I mean, honestly, like the knowledge of this and keeping the awareness of this is key, right? Because it's different if you're approaching someone, because they're not going to necessarily say they're overwhelmed, right? It's possible they'll say that, but really they may express it like in a different way just by being resistant. Or even if they say they're overwhelmed, to you, it might not look like anything changed, right? Because it's like they hit this tipping point within themselves. So it may not seem logical to you in that way. So please do not, I mean, this is a good principle in general anyway, to not negate what someone says and is feeling, because will not help, and they will not like that, no matter what the issue is. But rather than doing that, like pointing out, oh, well, it seems like, you could have time for that or something, that's not going to help. So you want to acknowledge the feelings, in whatever way they've expressed them. So you don't have to say you feel overwhelmed if they didn't say overwhelmed. It's better to mirror back their languaging. So mirroring back their languaging, so you can be sort of a calm presence. And then I think the important thing to do is to, as much as you can, without abandoning your own, because this is a tip that goes across all of the attachment styles and all relationships, without abandoning your own need that you need to ask for, trying to take the pressure off of how it sounds when you're saying it is still helpful. So like you can emphasize, I know this is my own responsibility, or this is my own thing I'm dealing with, really emphasizing that. But if there's a way you could help me here, kind of like really taking that responsibility piece off, because that's often the piece that's making the fearful avoidant feel the most overwhelmed, less so like literally time in this kind of a triggering situation, in this kind of a overwhelmed situation, but more that like feeling of responsibility. So if you can try to say it in a way that doesn't make them feel like there's this ultimate responsibility and this huge burden you're putting on them, while still asking for it, trying to have that tone coming across calmly, like, hey, it's your thing, but, is there a way you could help? And then this is kind of similar to with the dismissive avoidant approach as well. Really trying to ask what would work for them. Is there anything that would work for them? That kind of thing can be really helpful. But a piece I want to bring up here that's really important too for the fearful avoidant in these situations is to, as much as you can, so this doesn't help with the exact when they're already in that situation, but as much as you can in the relationship, try to know that this is the way things often go for the fearful avoidant, and try to be really proactive. So be proactive about trying to like almost help them set the boundaries, right? Like, hey, is that really okay with you? And like, just see if you can help them. We can't completely lead a horse to water and make them drink, obviously, in this case. Like may have to do more of their own healing and work around this to really get there. Because, if we've been used to suppressing boundaries and our own boundaries and things like that for a very long time, it's not so easy to get it out. But it still helps if you are a person who's open to that. And, on some level, even if subconsciously they're going to be aware of that. And it does make you feel like you're not someone who is as much overburdening them, even though that's just the perception of other people. So it's still helpful in the long term, and as a proactive thing to see if you can encourage them to set boundaries. Is encourage them, is that what you really want? That kind of thing. So that's one of my biggest tips for the approach to the fearful avoidant around this kind of thing and negotiating needs and what they can help you with and all of that. So let me just say those one more time so I can pull it out in a slightly different way as sort of a recap. So it's going to have to do with your tone and approach, right? And not in when you know someone's going to be could be potentially easily overwhelmed anyway, to come across less that way. It's going to have to do with negotiating with them so they really feel like they have a lot of leeway and it's not just a demand being made of them. And it's also going to look like, as much as possible, being proactive and understanding this whole thing and seeing if you can sort of like encourage them to start to set some more boundaries and to see if they can, even see themselves some of this stuff before it becomes overwhelm. Okay, so if you're the fearful avoidant, all of this hopefully is helpful for you to see as well and to get the big picture. In the moment, it's hard to do that. But, while you're watching this video, hopefully it's a time when you can sort of see a bigger picture and be like, oh, that's why I do that. And so, again, the understanding goes really a lot of the way. The second thing I would say is trying to be really, really patient and kind to yourself. This is not your fault. This is just something that you can heal. And let me know if you want any more help with that, like I said. It's possible to heal it. So it's something that you are navigating that is something that's really like wounding and triggered stuff in us that we don't always think of that way, but it is. And so, and then I would also say, like, realizing that even though because sometimes for fearful avoidance in particular, they're like, I don't understand why I'm like this or why I'm doing it. I'm going to do another video on the hot cold thing with fearful avoidance, which often can perplex them as much as anyone else when it happens. So understanding that, it's for reasons, like whether or not you've explored all the reasons. Sometimes we can't uncover all of them exactly as to why, it got this way in the first place. But, understanding that it's possible, though, to make change. If you're patient and kind with yourself and you're understanding about the why, and you have a partner who's willing to even help, that can be helpful too. To just to have faith and the belief that things can change, but they don't have to. Won't probably change immediately, right? It's going to take some time, and one of the things that beyond starting to reprogram core beliefs and do that actual healing work. For your attachment style. Beyond that, I think one important thing you can do is to notice when you're in the overwhelm, and consider that this is why, and consider if there's a boundary that was crossed or that you didn't speak up for something earlier, and know that you can still do it. Okay, so like not feeling like everything already happened in the past and now you're in this state, helping your nervous system balance. It can be really helpful both for that overwhelmed state and also if you notice you flipped into the dismissive avoidant state. That's a little harder because like when you're in it, it just feels so strongly like you're in that. But even in that state, you might be able to on some level be like, okay, I'm in the state, it's not going to last forever, and possibly do some sort of like breath work or something to help you calm down a bit, because sometimes it doesn't feel like you're not calm when you're in that dismissive avoidant state. I can say this, by the way, because I don't think I mentioned in this video yet, but for those of you who've watched other videos, you may know that I am a healed fearful avoidant, so I'm very familiar with this. So realize that you actually, even though it feels like more like just withdrawing from someone and almost like hyper calm compared to like sometimes the other ways that it can feel as a fearful avoidant, that you actually are more dysregulated than you realize. So kind of regulating yourself in those moments can be helpful, trying to have the higher perspective, but also knowing that it'll pass. So that's really the bigger perspective. It's going to pass. It's changing over time, taking the small steps, and just knowing that you can do it. So if you have any other topics you'd like me to cover, or if you have any comments on this video, I would love it if you would share below. And thanks for watching.